Listen, do you want to know a secret? Do you promise not to tell? Wait a minute. That's something else. Never mind. Welcome back, Gary Lewis and the Playboys fans. It's been a little while, but I've been promising a follow-up video on the Gary Lewis album Listen for quite some time, and we've finally gotten there. So, when we left off in this series, not so long ago, we talked about New Directions, a studio album that was not particularly successful, easily their lowest charting record to that point, but it was trying to reinvent Gary Lewis and the Playboys as sort of this brand new psychedelic, sound that would appeal to the young people, that kind of thing. And no more were they just the boy next door group of classic rock cover artists. They were this new, interesting group. And even though New Directions was not successful, that was kind of a shame, because it's actually a pretty good album. I would argue the terrifying giant Gary Lewis face cover probably did the album more harm than good. And the last actual episode in this series was on the self-titled compilation record from Sunset that kind of lived and died. Sunset records in the US were mostly just budget reissues. Everything on here was previously available elsewhere, didn't really find a niche, didn't really catch on, and indeed is not even usually considered an official Gary Lewis album. But I did want to cover it, as it was interesting, I guess, to kind of see how one compilation, like their wildly successful Golden Greats record, the most successful album the group ever did, how that compares with one that came just a year or so later. But let's talk about Listen, because Listen is kind of neglected by today's standards. I would argue that Listen is the spiritual successor to New Directions. It's not quite as daring, it's not quite as effective, but it has a lot of the same personnel involved on various levels. It has a lot of the same general ideas about reimagining Gary in these new ways. It doesn't take as many risks as New Directions does, but at the end of the day, it definitely is a peer to it. That sort of thing. Interestingly, I don't think Listen has ever been widely released as CD. Most Gary Lewis albums have, not quite all of them. You can see this 3 for CD. Indeed, this, which includes the next record, Gary Lewis Now, which you can glimpse over there. We'll get to that eventually. This CD just mentions it briefly in passing. It's kind of just a footnote. Oh yeah, the record called Listen came out, and then that's that. Really not much to go on there, and most of the compilation ones, the singles, or the hits compilation packages, barely mention it, if at all. So Listen is kind of relegated to just a footnote in Gary Lewis's catalog, mostly because it's not readily available and it wasn't especially successful. The first mainstream Gary Lewis LP to completely miss the charts. New Directions had peaked about 185, so barely charting, barely breaking that top 200. Listen did not chart at all. So, joining the Sunset Records compilation is one with no sort of chart, placement to brag about, that sort of thing. Released in September of 1967, quickly relegated to a footnote. Listen is produced by Gary Klein, who was one of the producers involved in New Directions. In the booklets for the CDs, Gary Lewis notes that Gary Klein was a very hands-on producer. His producing partners, who are credited on this record, but not so much here, they were more like the office paperwork kind of people, not so much hands-on with the music. Jack Nietzsche, who done some of the arranging on New Directions, returns as arranger here, so that's a little bit unique there. I think Listen only had one CD release, and that was in Japan, and that even today has a pretty high markup, so it must have only been available for a short time. So Listen is quickly, despite some interesting involvement behind the scenes, quickly kind of fallen into obscurity and is mostly forgotten. Also returning from New Directions comes Richard Oliver, who writes the liner notes for the back, but they're liner notes unlike any we've ever seen before. You know, if you've watched previous episodes in this series, I'm not a big fan of some of the work that was done on the blurbs or the little write-ups in the back of each album. Some of them are completely anonymous and feel like they were written in 10 minutes. But Richard Oliver, who wrote a decent, albeit dated, blurb for the back of New Directions, here he writes us a poem, and that is our blurb for the day. So permit me to read you Richard Oliver's poem. Listen to the sounds around you as you walk through crowded streets, through the hurry and scuffle or the tranquility of tree-lined parks. Listen to the sounds of life, birds chirping, dogs barking, cars honking, and people talking. Listen to the sounds of people. They're of this generation. They're speaking out. They're being heard. Listen to the sounds being said, not teeny bopper falderall, but hello, how are you? Isn't it a nice day? And thank you. Listen to the sounds of smiles and the warmth of friends, or to the cry for reason and the welcome reply. Listen to the sounds of love, for a girl who is a dream, but can be seen for the joys which life can give. Listen to the sounds of happiness, caring and exploring. Those are the real and the sincere sounds of today, by Richard Oliver. Just for the record, Listen is not a song on this record, and I don't think Listen's a song, period. But interestingly, I guess Richard Oliver just came up with all of that. Excuse the motorcycle. Listen, I guess maybe that's why they called the album Listen. I don't know. Very bizarre. Richard Oliver must have been a poet at heart. I don't know. Alrighty. So, something that's kind of interesting, first of all, is that we get the same picture on both sides of the sleeve. Just one with the title and artist, and a big sales sticker on mine, one with the track list. But there's something missing from this front cover. Something that's been on every other record has vanished. Gary Lewis, Listen? What are we missing? If you answered The Playboys, you're correct. For the first time we have just Gary Lewis, not Gary Lewis and the Playboys. So you might think, oh, this is like a solo record of his. Well, I'm going to throw a curveball to you because the record clearly says Gary Lewis and the Playboys on it. Indeed. Listen, Gary Lewis and the Playboys, produced by Gary Klein, arranged by Jack Nietzsche. So, there you go. So, for some reason, the sleeve does not promote the Playboys, but the record itself does. Very strange. Now, we know, of course, the Playboys were a revolving door, and very few albums actually identify any of them by name because there were constantly musicians being changed and swapped out and stuff. And there are people who are experts on this and are far more versed than I. That was a can of worms I didn't want to open with this video series. I kind of wanted to look more at the songs themselves. But yeah, no Playboys mentioned unless you bought the record and opened it up. And then you would see Gary Lewis and the Playboys. So very, very interesting. We know, of course, the amount of involvement the Playboys themselves had on each record kind of varies, but I don't doubt Gary had some help from at least some of them here. Interesting stuff. Alrighty, so let's take a look-see at our actual music. We have some returning artists we're very familiar with, notably the writing team of Bonner and Gordon, as well as writers like the Boylan Brothers and Tim Hardin, who are very much emphasized on here. So, much like New Directions, we have kind of a smaller pool of writing talent for Gary to work with. So some of the songs kind of naturally fit together because the same people worked on them behind the scenes. We start off with the main thing this record's remembered for, the number 52 charting single, Jill, by this songwriting team of Bonner and Gordon, who we'll see several more times today. Very elaborate, kind of haunting sound. A lot of fans compare it to something from the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds. I can kind of hear it. It's not quite the first comparison I would have made, but definitely kind of there. Very good pick for a strong opener, and definitely a good song to showcase, I think, Gary's attempts to be more adult sounding, to not appeal to a teenage audience so much. You know, Jill, do-do-do-do, this kind of really melancholy tune. Gary does a nice job on it as well. So that's really this album's main contribution to the overall discography. If you have a hits package CD or something similar, you will find Jill on there, generally near the end. After Jill, Don't Make Promises You Can't Keep. Tim Hardin, songwriter, had released his own album back in 1966 or so, and he had showcased several songs, and 2 of those ended up on this record as well. Don't Make Promises You Can't Keep. Gary goes with kind of like an easy listening vibe. His is a little more upbeat, not quite as dramatic as Tim Hardin's original. This song was also covered by several other artists, including the Bo Bramos and Gary Puckett and the Union Gap, but Gary's version doesn't do a lot with the emotion of it, like the Hardin's original does. He goes for more the "Don't make promises you can't keep," keeping it kind of upbeat and you know, more streamlined, I think. After that, a song many of us will recognize, "You Know She'd Rather Be With Me." Today we associate that with the Turtles. This was also by Bonner and Gordon, who wrote Happy Together, and this, which was the B-side for that. Gary doesn't go for like the loud, brassy, over-the-top sound that the Turtles did. His is just a lighter version, but interestingly is somewhat longer than the Turtles one. It has like a harpsichord solo in it, which is really interesting. Granted, it could be a piano just sped up, but it sounds like a harpsichord. Excuse me. After that, we have Look, Here Comes the Sun. This was by the Boylan Brothers. I think Teddy Neely did it first. Teddy, or Ted Neely, known for playing the lead role in Jesus Christ Superstar, recorded a record not too long before that, and indeed they actually cover some of his songs previously. And we'll see him a few times here today, but Look, Here Comes the Sun. Pretty interesting stuff. The Sunshine Company had had great success with it. It was their last charting single. Gary kind of adds this really heavy percussion to it, or at least Gary and his team, I should say. And it has almost like a marching sound, like the sun's coming up to a steady military beat. It's an interesting choice. I don't think it really helps like the tender lyrics of the song, waking up next to your lover and you know, you're still in love with them as the night turns to dawn, that sort of thing. Gary doesn't really buy into that particular part of it. Doesn't go for the intimacy of it. After that, we have a song simply called Happiness. Happiness is by the team of Pearls and Learman, who also wrote New in Town. That was used as the B-side to Jill and was on the New Directions record as well. New in Town's pretty good, you know, about moving to a new city, not knowing anyone, not knowing how to fit in, that sort of thing. Happiness, I think, is an original for Gary and the gang, and it's just kind of a simple ditty there. I noticed there was a Charlie Brown tune called Happiness as well, and this actually has kind of a Charlie Brown sound to it, almost like something simple that a group of children could very easily perform. The orchestration's a little bit too heavy, but overall I think it works pretty well. I don't know, it's one thing if you like kind of coy, cloying songs, you might like this one. If not, you probably won't. It was later used as the B-side to the Gary Lewis single, Has She Got the Nicest Eyes. I also want to say She Has Got, but Has She Got the Nicest Eyes, and that one we'll talk about in a later video. And we end the first side there with one of the weirder choices, Bring the Whole Family, a song that I think is about gambling addiction. The Boylan Brothers wrote it. Ted Neely had also covered it. This weird offbeat song, you know, aces go both ways. Gary isn't quite as crazy as Neely goes with it. You know, he doesn't have the emotion and the power, but Gary goes as more like an off-kilter, somewhat melancholy, but more just weird vibe with the song. It is pretty cool, and I like that, again, Gary's trying something different for a more adult audience, but at the end of the day, I don't know if it was really the right choice for him. And it's different. One of those ones I can't quite figure out how I feel about it. And you flip the record over for Reason to Believe, another Tim Hardin one. Gary takes Tim Hardin's kind of simple original and expands on it. It's more orchestral. Gary goes a little bit crazier with it, that sort of thing. But it doesn't have the heart and the soul and kind of the bass simplicity that Hardin's did. I think it was a little too heavily arranged and orchestrated there. But I like, again, that we're getting, you know, the same writers working on multiple songs. Followed by a song called New Day, New Day. I believe this is a Bonner and Gordon original for Gary. If not, whoever else has covered it, their cover hasn't been released. It is like a fun, feel-good pop kind of song, but the ending gets really weird where they keep speeding Gary up. New day, new day, new day, and it really, again, embraces that kind of psychedelic new wave sort of thing that we wouldn't usually associate with Gary, but I don't know, sometimes it's a little too weird, I guess. Followed by the song Small Talk. Small Talk by the last Bonner and Gordon song on there. I think Gary did it first, but today it tends to be associated more with female artists like Leslie Gore and Claudine Loger, excuse me, that sort of thing. They did covers, and theirs I think are a little bit better. Gary goes for a more upbeat, crazy kind of approach to it, that kind of thing. He definitely duets with himself a few times. They use kind of like, maybe reverb's probably the wrong word, but something very similar so Gary can sing with himself. It doesn't have the heart that like Leslie Gore's version does. You know, you're making casual small talk with someone that you like and that sort of thing. Gary goes a little bit too big to be small talk, I think. We have Angel on the Corner. This one had been done by the Magicians, a group that we've talked about before when it comes to Gary covering their music. Gary kind of slows it down from the Magicians version, does it very slow, very easy, very languid, and that works really well. For like this love ballad, going slow, going kind of easy, works really well. And compared to the other songs on here where he's gone crazy and amped things up, I like that he amped it down and kind of just relaxed for it. We have a Lovin' Spoonful cover, another group that has come up in our Gary Lewis videos. So the Lovin' Spoonful did 6 O'Clock, written by John Sebastian, of course. Gary's is kind of like the light version. We've talked about this with some of their older albums, that Gary's cover is good, but it's like, you know, the original, but a light version. Low in calories, sometimes good in taste, sometimes not. This one comes off a little sterile, that kind of thing. The arrangement's pretty good, but Gary's simplicity for the song doesn't quite sell it as well as the Lovin' Spoonful's original. And lastly, from the team of Dobney and Jones, we have the song Carefree, and we're revisiting Teddy Neely again. So, another one by him. If you listen to Teddy Neely's 1966 self-titled album, pretty much got most of the songs that Gary Lewis will cover at this point. Gary follows Teddy very, very closely. It's almost a carbon copy. And indeed, the fact that Gary doesn't quite have the vocal range that Ted Neely does is kind of what sets it apart a little bit, but not in a good way. I think Ted Neely's is better. But Gary tries really hard, and I have to give him some props. So if you liked New Directions, you will definitely like Listen. But Listen to me doesn't quite have the depth that New Directions did. You know, there are some songs that don't quite work as well as they should have, I think, with a little more thinking in terms of arrangement, Gary singing and stuff. Granted, of course, Gary was involved in the service, so no doubt he was recording rather quickly whenever he had time before he was shipped back overseas, all that kind of stuff going on. Plus, the group probably wasn't sure what their future prospects were, you know, in terms of singles and album, you know, chart performances. Those were steadily going down. So, interesting in that regard. They still have one more hit single up their sleeve, and we will get to that hopefully before too long when we talk about Gary Lewis Now. He'll send you all his love in a letter, sealed with a kiss. There you go, there's a spoiler alert for you. But in the meantime, if you've listened to this kind of unusual, mostly forgotten studio album, please comment your thoughts below, or any of your favorite Gary Lewis songs. And I hope to see you next time. We have some stuff with Steve Lewis coming up, some more Beach Boys stuff, and of course Laurel and Hardy are on the horizon too. I didn't forget about them. Hope to see you next time, my friends. So long.